Chapter 6 of Finn the Wolfhound by Alec John Dawson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 The Ordeal of the Ring. Finn's first winter was a mild one, and it passed without his noticing anything remarkable in climatic conditions. But he was aware of change when spring came. The downs round Finn's home never seemed to get really wet. The drainage of their chalky soil was such that their surface could not hold much moisture, and outside the downs the world was as yet a closed book to Finn. But spring asserted itself notably in his veins, and appeared to enter into a partnership with his lusty youth and wholesome, generous scale of living to speed the young Wolfhound's growth in wonderful style. Long, slow trots along the Sussex highways and byways behind the bicycle of the master or the mistress hardened Finn's round feet without overstraining his young legs, for the reason that the pace was always set with special reference to his capabilities in this direction. Even in the winter 9/10 of his waking hours were spent in the open, yet so wise and constant was the supervision of his life that he never knew what chill meant, and never lay on damp ground, never missed a meal, and never suffered from the penalties which attend overtaxed canine digestion as surely as they attend the same state in human beings. On the morning of his first birthday, Finn, with his sister Kathleen and Tara and the master, walked down to the little local railway station and was weighed. He weighed 119 pounds, exactly 26½ pounds more than his sister, and 13 pounds less than his mother. With the standard pressed down upon his shoulder bones, he stood within 1/8 of an inch of 35 inches in height. The height of wolfhounds is measured from the shoulder to the ground, not from the head. It must be remembered that although some dogs reach their full development in 1 year from birth, Irish Wolfhounds are not really fully developed before the end of the 2nd year, though they may be said to attain their full height and probably their full length in about 18 months. After that, however, comes a good deal of what breeders call furnishing, which means filling out, general development of flesh and muscle and coat, and an all-round hardening and setting. Chest and loin deepen and widen a good deal in the 2nd year. Ribs, legs, jaws, tail, and neck all develop and strengthen greatly during this period, under such favourable conditions as Finn enjoyed. But he was a noble-looking young hound, even on this day, which technically saw the end of his whelphood. And then came 3 more months of Sussex downland summer, the hunting of innumerable rabbits, out-of-doors days which were 15 hours long, and a steadily increasing amount of slow road exercise, for which Finn was still fortified by 3 good meals a day, and those of the best that care and science could devise. In early October the master devised a new game, tolerably amusing in its way, but rather lacking in point and excitement, Finn thought. A ring was marked out in the orchard by means of a few faggots being stuck into the ground at intervals, and in the centre of this ring the mistress of the kennels would take up her stand as a sort of director of ceremonies. Then, sometimes with the assistance of the maidservant and the gardener, and sometimes a couple of village lads, Tara and Kathleen and Finn would be led gravely round and round, and to and fro, by the master, while all their movements were closely watched from the centre of the ring. At first Finn found this a good deal of a nuisance, because he disliked having a lead attached to his collar. His inclination was to pull against it sideways. Before him always, however, he had the gracious example of his beautiful mother, who never did more than keep the lead nicely tight while she marched round, with her head well up, her tail hanging in a graceful sweeping curve, and her whole body radiantly expressive of alertness. Gradually it was borne in upon Finn that these were matters which touched his reputation, his pride, his belief in himself, that he, Finn, was being observed and judged with regard to his appearance and deportment. Once possessed of this idea, who so stately proud in all the Wolfhound world as Finn? At the end of a week he could march as sedately as Tara herself, or bound forward with the springy elasticity of a tiger cat at a touch on his flank from the Master's hand, stand erect on his hind feet, with one forepaw on the Master's forefinger raised shoulder high, or fall to attention with hindquarters well set out, 4 feet even and forward, head up and tail correctly curved in the position of a thoroughbred hackney at rest. It was great fun to find how easily commendation could be earned from the Master in this simple manner, for Finn never realized that quite a number of hours of patient instruction and practice had been devoted to the attainment of this end. Then there came a mid-October morning when, in place of the early scamper on the downs, Finn and Kathleen were given a light breakfast a little before daylight arrived, and after that were treated to an unusually elaborate grooming. Finn had an exciting sense of impending change and adventure, and even Tara seemed moved to a stately kind of restlessness which kept her pacing the den as though performing a minuet, instead of sitting or lying at her ease. Tara seemed to be a good deal moved and excited when 2 bright nickel chains, with queer little tin medals attached to them, were produced, and fitted on 2 new green collars for Finn and Kathleen. She nosed these chains with great interest, for they roused all kinds of vague memories in her, and anticipations too, which she could not define to herself. Finn and Kathleen had never seen dog chains before, and paid very little heed to them now. Their necks and shoulders never tasted the irk of the state which is called being tied up. The Master drew the attention of the mistress of the kennels to Tara's interest in the chains, and then he stroked the great bitch's head as he said, "Never any more, old lady. You have done your share, and never shall be hustled about at shows again. So just lie down and go to sleep. The missus will be home to see you again this evening. Be a good girl, and wish your son and daughter luck." Tara watched them wistfully as they all filed out of the stable-yard gateway to the road, and then, with the philosophy born of honoured age and matronhood, returned to the den, and lay down with her muzzle on the Master's slippers. Finn was weighed on the station platform that morning, and turned the scale at 139 pounds, with 9 months still before him for "furnishing." "Of course, one has to remember that not a single chance has been missed with Finn," said the Master. "His development is probably some months ahead of the average hound of his age, but it is pretty good at that. Yes, I think it is pretty good." And then a train came roaring into the station, and Finn and Kathleen, who up till now had only occasionally seen trains from a distance, lowered their tails and pulled back a little on their chains. The Master had a pleasant way with people like railway guards, and this particular train had not very many people in it. Accordingly, the 2 young hounds presently found themselves in a passenger compartment, the door of which was locked. So chains were removed, and while Finn stood with his nose against the glass of one window, Kathleen, facing the other way, had her nose against the opposite window. When the train started with a jerk, Finn had his first abrupt sensation of travel, and he did not like it at all. It seemed to him that the ground was suddenly snatched from under him, and then he saw trees and posts and houses flying bodily past him. He barked loudly at one little flying house, which seemed almost to brush the window against which his nose rested, and the mistress of the kennels laughed at him as she placed a hand caressingly on his neck. Now Finn detested being laughed at. He did not know what it meant, and when the Master laughed with him, during a frolic of any kind, he liked the sound very much. But being laughed at always made the hair stir uncomfortably on his shoulder blades. As the culprit in this case was the mistress of the kennels, he did not even look at her angrily, but when Tara laughed at him, as she often had done in the past, he always protested with a sort of throaty beginning of a growl, which was not so much really a growl as an equivalent for the sound humans make and describe as tut-tut or tish-tish. Finn did not again bark at a flying house or tree, but though the whole experience interested him very much, he was greatly puzzled by some of the phenomena connected with this railway journey. In due course, but not before Finn had become comparatively blasé as a traveller, and more than a little weary of the whole thing, the chains were put on again, and the hounds were led out from the train into the midst of a crowd of strange people. Finn had no idea that there were anything like so many people in the world as he found pressing about him now, and many of them were leading dogs on chains. Finn's attitude towards these strange dogs was one of considerable reserve. He was very self-conscious, rather like a young man from the country who suddenly and unexpectedly found himself in the midst of some fashionable crush in London. An exceedingly well-bred young man, of remarkably fine figure, a sportsman of some prowess too, but one who felt that he had not been introduced to any members of the noisy, bustling throng, and fancied that every one else was conscious of the fact. New experiences were crowding thick and fast upon Finn and Kathleen just now. After rubbing shoulders with this astonishing crowd for some minutes, they found themselves face to face for the first time in their lives with a flight of steps. True, they each felt a soothing hand on their shoulders, a hand they knew and loved, but the thing was disconcerting none the less. At first glance, these steps obviously called for small leaps and bounds as a mode of progression; and yet, when one took ever so small a leap, one's nose inevitably came into sharp contact with the legs of strange humans who climbed in front, a distinctly unpleasant experience, because undignified, and implying a desire for familiarity which Finn by no means felt. However, an end came to the steps at length, and then, after walking some distance in the open road, and being allowed to run loose for a few minutes in a quiet street, full of strange, strong smells and a curious absence of air, Finn and Kathleen were led into a large building, bigger than the orchard at home, and containing, besides countless humans, all the dogs that ever were in all the world, all talking incoherently and together. At least, that was how it struck Finn and Kathleen. As a matter of fact, there were some thousands of dogs in the Crystal Palace that day, for it was the opening day of the great annual Kennel Club show, the biggest society event of the year amongst dogs. It was a more exclusive assembly than any of the purely human sort, because every dog among all the thousands there assembled was an aristocrat with a pedigree as long as his body. There was not a parvenu among them all, and there are no human assemblies about which that may be said. It is difficult to conceive precisely how great an ordeal it was for Finn and Kathleen to face, when they were led down the length of this great building to their own particular bench among the other Irish Wolfhounds, of whom there were some 30 or 40 present. For 50 yards or more they walked down an aisle between double rows of benches, every yard of which was occupied by terriers of one sort and another, all yapping and barking at the top of their respective registers. Be it remembered that Finn and Kathleen, up till that morning, had never been at close quarters with more than one dog at a time, and had never seen more than about a dozen dogs outside their own breed altogether. The noise of barking, the pungency and variety of smells, and the crowded multiplicity of doggy personalities were at first overpowering, and Finn and his sister walked with lowered tails, quick shifting eyes, raised hackles, and twitching skin. But pride of race and the self-confidence which goes with exceptional strength soon came to Finn's aid, and by the time he reached his own bench his tail was carried high, and muzzle also, though he walked with unusual rigidity, and at heart was far from comfortable. Though the benches were continuous, the space allotted to each dog was divided from that of the next dog by a strong galvanized iron network, and each dog's chain was fastened to the back of his bench. When the Wolfhounds were benched, Finn had his sister upon his right, and, though he never suspected it, his redoubtable sire, the great champion Dermot Asthore, on his left. On Kathleen's right was a big rebel of a dog with an angry eye, named Wolftone. Facing them on the other side of their aisle was a long row of their cousins, the Deerhound family, while behind them and out of sight was an even longer row of their cousins on the other side, the Great Dane family. Farther on, beyond Champion Dermot Asthore, who sat in the rear of his bench wrapped in a cloak of kingly isolation — he disliked shows very much, and now, late in his great career, was thoroughly weary of them — was a row of 25 distant connections of Finns, belonging to the Russian Wolfhound or Borzois family. Finn had noticed these white and lemon-coloured curled darlings as he was led along to his own bench, and his nostrils had wrinkled with scorn as he noted their prettiness, the snipey sharpness of their long muzzles, the extraordinary slimness and delicacy of their legs, the effeminate narrowness of their chests, and the toyish blue ribbons that decorated some of their collars. Mentally he granted these fashionable darlings fleetness, but absolutely withheld from them the killing powers they are credited with. "Bah!" one may imagine Finn muttering to himself. "Foxy tails, weasels' faces, terriers' legs. You are almost toys." Heavy-coated, massive old Dermot Asthore took no more notice of Finn than of the rest of the show. He was supremely bored, and being perfectly aware that the show lasted 3 days, his immediate prospect disgusted him. One fancied that on the few occasions upon which he did open his mouth at all, his remark was always the same: "Tcha! And at my time of life, too!" But Finn was not otherwise neglected. The mistress of the kennels had a little camp-stool, and on this she sat midway between Finn and Kathleen. Finn also had the master's hand-bag in his section of the bench, and that was rather nice and companionable. Also, the master himself seemed seldom to be far away. He flitted to and fro, generally in conversation with somebody, and always followed, for so long as he was in sight, by the eyes of Finn and Kathleen. In his hand he carried a yellow book, which told him the names of every dog in all that vast assemblage of canine princes and lordlings, with details, too, as to their exalted ancestry. The mistress of the kennels was studying a similar book, and if Finn, whose muzzle at this time was just above her shoulder, could have read, he would have seen that she was busy with the Irish Wolfhound section of the catalogue. This showed her that there were 3 separate classes for Irish Wolfhound dogs, and 3 for bitches of the same breed: open, limit, and novice, with first, second, and third prizes to be won in each class. The open classes were for all and any Irish Wolfhounds of each sex. The limit classes were for such as had not previously won more than 6 first prizes, and the novice classes were for hounds that had never won a first prize in any show. There was also a junior class for hounds of both sexes under the age of 18 months. In the open dog class there appeared the names of no fewer than 2 fully fledged champions, and 2 other fully developed hounds that were already within measurable reach of championship honours, besides several other Wolfhounds of high repute and proved prowess as prize winners at shows. In the open bitch class there was 1 champion entered, and 4 or 5 others of whom great things had been predicted. In the other classes it was evident that competition would be brisk. In the limit class, for example, were several hounds well past maturity, who had already won at other shows as many as 4 and 5 first prizes. The novice classes included the names of some extremely promising hounds, several of whom had already won second and third prizes elsewhere. In the junior class there were 4 other entries, besides those of Finn and Kathleen. But Finn and Kathleen had been boldly entered right through in all classes for which they were eligible. Old breeders who had not seen them smiled over the breeders' enthusiasm in entering 15-months-old youngsters in open classes, where they would meet old champions whose very names carried great weight both with the judges and the public. A young Irish Wolfhound lying down among the straw of his bench is a very deceptive animal. When he is, say, 3 years old, his beard and brows, massive shoulders, and set, assured expression give one fair warning of the commanding presence he will display when he rises. But when he is yet young he looks a much lesser creature than he is when seen on a show bench, particularly if, as so often happens, he makes a kind of nest for himself in the straw. Most of the people specially interested in Wolfhounds paused opposite Finn's place, and made some passing remark about "Fine head, that," "Good muzzle that youngster has," or if they noticed one of his forelegs over the straw, "Wonderfully heavy timbers, those." But they paid no very particular heed really to the hounds from the cottage beside the downs. Now and again, however, an old breeder, passing leisurely along the benches, would pause when he had passed Kathleen, and, after a quick glance back, return to Finn's place, looking up his number in the catalogue, and gazing at the young hound with a gravely calculating eye. 15 months old! Muttered one of these, glancing to and fro between his catalogue and Finn. By old Dermot. Tara. Yes, Finn. And so on down the benches. Finn had a notion that these men knew a good deal. They had a knowledgeable way with them. Finn would have obeyed them readily. That was how their manner impressed him. By the time Finn had to some extent exhausted the first novelty of his surroundings, and was contemplating the desirability of sleeping off some of its effects, the number of new impressions he had formed that morning was at least equal to those of a human's first visit to a great picture gallery. The Master came along with something of a rush, chains were unsnapped, and Finn and his sister were taken down from the bench. A number of other Wolfhounds were leaving the bench at the same time, and being led in the direction of a fenced-in judging ring, square in shape, by the way, at one end of the building. The dog classes for Irish Wolfhounds were about to be judged, and the mistress of the kennels brought Kathleen along, though her sex was not to be judged for some time, because she knew the youngster would be unhappy if left alone on the bench. The Master was leading Finn, and before they entered the ring he passed his hand solicitously over the dog's immature brows and beard once or twice, even as a very young man may be noticed to tug at his moustache with a view, presumably, to making the very most of it. The mistress found a place for herself beside the ring with Kathleen, which not only gave her a good view of the judging, but also showed her plainly to all in the ring. This was for Finn's especial benefit, and then the Master walked into the ring with Finn, and took up his place next to the lady who led the grand old hound who had sired Finn, Champion Dermot. In the centre of the ring, accompanied by a busy steward with a sheaf of notes in his hand, stood the judge of Irish Wolfhounds, a man grown grey, white-haired indeed, in the study of dog-folk, and one of whom it might be said that by his own single-hearted efforts he had saved the breed of Irish Wolfhounds from becoming extinct in the middle of last century, and accomplished a great deal of the spade work which has brought the modern breed to its present flourishing state. No man living could claim to know more of Irish Wolfhounds than this white-haired judge, who stood in the centre of a ring formed by all the greatest aristocrats of the historic breed. "Move them round, please," he said quietly. "Keep them moving as freely as possible." Finn was the only hound in that ring under 2½ years of age, and Finn was just 15 months old, a child among the acknowledged leaders and chieftains of his race. One noticed it in the comparative angularity and legginess of his build. He carried less flesh than the others, was far less set. In a word, they had furnished, and Finn had not. The mistress of the kennels, from her place beside the ring, noticed these things and sighed for the soaring ambition which had led to the entering of this tyro in open class. "Finn, boy," said she, in an impressive, long-drawn whisper, as Finn passed her place. The youngster's ears lifted, and his fine neck curved superbly as he looked round at the mistress. And just then the Master bent over him, whispering close beside his ear certain nonsense words which were associated in Finn's mind with certain events, like rabbit hunting and racing on the downs. "Choo-choo-choo-choo-you, Finn," whispered the Master, and that was a nonsense word connected with two things only: the unexpected rising of a rabbit ahead, and the new game in which Finn had been led round a ring with Tara and Kathleen in the orchard at home. And, to be sure, there was the mistress of the kennels looking on all the time, and Finn and the Master walking round, and other dogs, and it was thus that Finn passed a judge at a dog show for the first time. It was thus that he realized that it was a show, that he, Finn, was being judged, compared with others of his kind. From that moment Finn showed the best that was in him to show, with an air as kingly as that of any of his warrior ancestors in the ancient days, when they were the friends and defenders of kings, the companions in sport of great chieftains. When next Finn approached the judge in the march round, the Master touched his flank, and he rose up to his full towering height, his forepaws higher than a man's head, and the Master pretended to rebuke him with, "Down, Finn, down, you rascal!" But Finn knew well, by his tone, that all was well, and his own appearance most imposing. The judge in the centre of the ring chewed the end of his pencil reflectively, and now and again he said, "That will do, thank you," to some exhibitor, and that exhibitor withdrew from the ring with his hound, wearing an elaborately assumed air of indifference or relief, and feeling much real chagrin. Occasionally the judge would merely wave his hand for the same purpose, with a nod to some particular exhibitor. During about the 5th or 6th march round, the judge waved his hand and nodded to the Master with a murmured remark. The Master's face fell, and as he drew abreast of the opening in the side of the ring, he moved out slowly with Finn. To him then came a steward, fussily official. He was not to withdraw from the ring, it appeared, but only to take up his stand in one corner of it, with Champion Dermot Ashthore, Champion Munster, and a magnificent hound named Cormac. The judge was making notes on slips of paper now, and in another minute or so the ring was empty, save for the 3 hounds mentioned and Finn. And now there came the most searching sort of examination of these 4 Wolfhounds, who were drawn up in a row before the judge. Teeth, eyes, claws, all were in turn closely scrutinized by the man who had weighed and studied such matters for the half of a century. Muscles and joints were carefully felt, and all in a manner which no self-respecting hound could take exception to, with the assured, gentle, knowledgeable touch which soothes and inspires confidence in all animal folk. Then the 4 hounds must walk round once more in single file. Then they must run to and fro singly. And lastly, they must stand together to have the measuring standard applied to their shoulders. Young Finn was the last to come under the standard, and the judge measured him 4 times over before he would admit himself correct in pronouncing Finn full 35 1/4 inches at the shoulder. "And I may say, sir, the biggest hound I ever measured. 15 1/2 months, you say? Tcha! Remarkable, remarkable, sir!" And this judge knew more about Irish Wolfhounds than any other man living. Cormac's Master was told that he could stand aside, and a murmur went round the ring of spectators to the effect that Cormac was the winner. Then Champion Munster was told to stand aside, and the crowd placed him second. And then the judge spent 5 reflective minutes in pondering over Champion Dermot Asthore, the most famous Irish Wolfhound of his day, and young Finn, his son, and the son of beautiful Tara. The crowd wondered which of these two was to have third prize, the celebrated old champion or the tyro. At last the judge drew back, saying, "That will do, thank you." The crowd surged round the notice board. Excitement ran high now, for this was the most important Wolfhound class of the whole show, and the stewards were approaching the board to pin up the winning numbers. The Master glanced across at the Mistress of the Kennels, and stooped then to fondle Finn's ears, and murmur nonsense words to him. Then he too pressed forward to the notice board, and read the awards thus: First, number 247. Second, number 248. Third, number 261. V.H.C., number 256. H.C., number 259. Not daring to be quite certain, the Master drew out the little medal from Finn's collar, and read again on it Finn's number, 247. By this single judgment, then, Finn was declared winner of the open class for Irish Wolfhound dogs, and that meant that, unless a bitch could be found to beat him, Finn also won the challenge shield for best Irish Wolfhound in the show. Champion Dermot Asthore, his sire, came second, Champion Munster third, Cormac very highly commended, and a dog named Patrick highly commended. A moment later the Mistress of the Kennels was in possession of the great news, and her arms were about Finn's neck, while Finn nosed the momentarily neglected Kathleen's muzzle. "You great beautiful Finn, do you know you are first? Do you know you've beaten all the champions?" she said. And Finn nuzzled her shoulder, and wondered why she was in any doubt about his recognition of a thing so obvious. But it was a very great triumph all the same, the greatest triumph that had ever fallen to a breeder of Irish Wolfhounds, as some of those who hastened to congratulate the Master now were careful to point out. "For a 15 months novice, you know, against 2 champions and a hound like Cormac? Wonderful!" they said. But all were agreed that Finn justified the award. "He's the tallest hound in the breed now," said the judge, as he passed that way, and lingered to pass his hand over Finn's shoulder. "And he will be the biggest and finest if he lives. Distinctly the finest Irish Wolfhound I have ever handled, and I've handled most of them." Higher tribute from such a judge no dog could earn. The Master flushed with pleasure and pride as he heard it, and turned to receive the congratulations of the exhibitors of Champions Dermot Asthore and Munster. In the limit and novice classes Finn was awarded first place as a matter of course. There was nothing there to beat him. And then came the judging of the bitch classes, in which Kathleen did extraordinarily well for so young a hound, and in such good company, as the saying goes. She won third prize in the open class, second in the limit, and first in the novice. And then 4 other young hounds filed into the ring with Finn and Kathleen to be judged in the junior class. The other 4 young hounds were of a very good sort, but they had not the development, the bone, muscle, and stature of Finn and Kathleen, and there was not much hesitation in the decision which placed Finn first, Kathleen second, and a youngster called Connemara third. And then Finn had to be judged beside the winner of the open class for bitches, to decide who should be given the challenge shield for the best Irish Wolfhound in the show. And this was a task which tried the white-haired judge's patience for a long time. The female was Champion Lady Iseult of Leinster, and one of the most beautiful hounds of her sex ever seen. She was fully matured, and her reputation was world-wide. Judged on points, as breeders say, she was very near to perfection. Technically, it was difficult to find fault in her, unless that she was a shade too straight in her hocks, a fault that often goes with great stature in a hound. Finn's hocks were curved like an Arab stallion's, springy as a cat's. The judge tested the two hounds side by side again and again, and in every way he could think of, but without coming to a decision between them. At last, after passing his hand down the hocks of the Lady Iseult, he asked that they might both be run, quickly as possible, while led. That seemed to guide him a good deal, but it was clear that the conscientious old judge and breeder was not yet fully satisfied. Finally he had the opening to the rings closed and a hurdle brought in. Then the Lady Iseult was invited to run at and leap the hurdle. She did so, and with a very good grace, returning docilely enough to her master. Then the master loosed Finn, and the mistress of the kennels called him from the far side of the ring. Finn bounded forward with the elasticity of a cat, and cleared the hurdle with a perfect spring and fully 2 feet to spare. The judge stroked his imperial, laid a hand on the shoulders of both hounds, and said, "The young dog has it. The finest hound I ever saw." End of Chapter 6